Ollie here, and this is my review of The Two Doctors, the fourth story of the 22nd season of classic Doctor Who, starring Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor and Patrick Troughton as the Second Doctor. The Two Doctors is the 141st story overall. It's 3 parts long and is written by Robert Holmes. So the plot of the story is as follows. Whilst investigating unauthorized experiments into time travel aboard the space station Chimera, the Second Doctor and Jimmy come under attack from the warlike Sontarans. Elsewhere, the Sixth Doctor and Perry also decide to pay a visit to Chimera. They find the station abandoned but discover Jamie, half crazed, hiding in the ducting, and he tells them that the Doctor has been murdered. So that is the plot of The Two Doctors. The Two Doctors. Fuck it. The Two Doctors is a story I absolutely adore. I know it's not a fan favourite amongst Whovians, but to me, and possibly some other Whovians as well, I think this is probably Colin Baker's best televised story, and it is actually my favourite Sixth Doctor story as well. Possibly some of it probably being this is actually the first one of the very first Doctor Who DVDs I owned since I was a kid, but yeah, recently we watched it again as an adult. Even though there are some faults there, but I think it is a very fun story done right. Even though it is still a bit whack in some areas, but I do think it's one of those stories that it's bad, it's actually quite good, and actually is fun compared to other stories that tried to have the fun element but just didn't really hit the nail on the head like the previous story. The production was really good. The sets were really nice to look at, especially the space station Chimera. It looked really well done. It looked really well like your average spaceship, and I think the both were. I think in both of its states, it was quite very well done. Before the Sontarans attack, it looked very interesting to say the least. It looked very lively and active, and then after the Sontarans attack, when the Sixth Doctor and Perry arrived, it looked very desolate and very abandoned. And it's as if the Sontarans really did a number on the space station, pretty much killing everyone on board, and it was quite atmospheric as well. This story is also filmed abroad as well, and this time in Seville in Spain, and I love the Spanish feel that this story had, and especially the set of the Doña Arana's house where Chisini pretty much operated. And the start of the story actually started off in black and white with the Second Doctor and Jamie just talking over the TARDIS console. And I think the TARDIS console used here was the previous TARDIS console. I think that was the one that was used from season 15 to at least season 20. And it was quite nice. It was a nice little nod to the 1960s era as well. The music was great here. It was very much like your basic 80s synth music with some some Spanish music here and there, which was quite interesting to say the least. The script was quite good, even though a bit shaky at times. I think the Robert Holmes magic actually saved it, and I think the direction by Peter Moffat was decent. Although I think he said he didn't really like the direction of that. I don't think he said he liked the direction, but I think it was quite alright. The plot was good and nothing too complicated, and this is the third multi-Doctor story. Although it was rather strange having it air in the middle of the season as opposed to it being an anniversary special, and they pretty much aired under 2 years of the Five Doctors aired. But it was a nice little surprise. Now the plot of wanting Chicini to turn the Second Doctor into an androgon was a bit strange. When looking at it, it was quite a weird idea, but I think Patrick Troughton's acting really did make up for that odd plot. Despite being 3 parts long, with the 45-minute format that the season is actually using, it actually worked, and I think the plot pretty much tied up nicely. Nicely at the end, despite there's a lot of violence, and some filler in some scenes, but it actually did work. There was a bit of a subtle theme of meat eating and the dangers of meat eating. I think Robert Holmes was actually a vegetarian in real life, so he pretty much used that element into it, and he told it through Shokai, who was pretty much Cini's lackey, and obviously the man loved food, and he was actually a carnivore as well, and he was wanting to hunt whoever was there. He pretty much hunted anyone who was human. He pretty much saw if anyone looked meaty or just good enough, he'd consider them as food and wanted to eat them. I mean, I think, and then at the end of the story, I think the Sixth Doctor and Perry decided to become vegetarians. Do I think this? You don't. Despite how fun the story was, the two doctors was actually quite dark and very gruesome in a way. Just due to the depictions of characters getting stabbed, shot at, blood spillage, and the death count was quite high. Even though the cast was actually quite short, the only characters that actually survive, other than the doctors and their companions, is Anita, and she was Oscar's husband, Oscar's wife. I think the story had some very good moments, especially when the Sontarans attacked the space station and met the second Doctor and Jamie. And I think we don't actually see the Sontaran, but it was pretty much implied to be them. And I think it was kind of confirmed in the story that it was already them that was attacking. So I think the scene where before we meet the Doctor and Perry, with the Doctor and second Doctor and Jamie are pretty much being held hostage by a Sontaran. And that pretty much left us in suspense as to what was going to happen. And then when Six and Perry arrived at the space station, it had been completely deserted. And I think the part one cliffhanger was quite good. And this is when the Doctor and Perry were exploring the lower parts of the space station. And then I think they're exploring somewhere. The Doctor gets knocked out by this gas or something, and then Perry just gets attacked by a strange figure. And only for the strange figure to be a delirious Jamie who pretty much says that the Doctor has been killed. And the scene in part three when Six, Perry, and two in town trying to track down the second Doctor and Shockeye, but then they kind of witnessed some hubbub going on, and then that's when they were captured by Chicini. Although Oscar's death was quite sad, but it did really stick with me for a number of years. But it was quite interesting scene to see, even though it was a bit weird how it was told, but it was quite a scene that pretty much stuck with me as a kid. And I think the conclusion was very well done as well. This is when Chisini met a grisly end, and there was a very chaotic sequence with characters getting shot at, Sixth Doctor killing Shokai before getting wounded, which was a very crazy, hectic situation. So on to the acting, which I must commend, and I really enjoyed the performances because the chemistry between everyone was on fire and it greatly benefited the story. Colin Baker was great, and you can tell he was really having a ball with the story, and he actually said that The Two Doctors was his favourite story to film, because he got the chance to work with Patrick Troughton, and I think the two had great chemistry together, even though they only shared very few scenes together, but you can tell that they had good chemistry because of how different their doctors are. Because you know how the second doctor is very very clumsy. He's very scatterbrained, and you have the sixth doctor who's just very he has a very high opinion of himself and he's quite smug as well. So that's a very nice, very nice scene, a very nice contrast that they have against each other. And I think the Sixth Doctor does actually have some very good moments, especially with Perry, including a scene in the TARDIS when the Doctor fainted whilst Two was being tortured by the Centaurans. Perry was trying to help by offering him celery that could actually make him better, which was obviously a reference to the Fifth Doctor. But then the Doctor agreed to, and then randomly thought he needed jelly babies as well, which is another obvious reference to the Fourth Doctor. And I do like when the Sixth Doctor was literally about to not turn into an androgon, but then the process was slowly starting, but he was starting to have some androgon tendencies, whilst the second Doctor had become an androgon, and then I think this is when he started getting a bit sweaty, and then he was starting to feel something, and then he sees a cat and wants to eat the cat, but then Perry and Jamie were just thinking to themselves like, "What the hell is this?" Patrick Troughton here was very good. It was nice seeing him back as a second Doctor, and unfortunately, this is the last time he actually plays a second Doctor, as he unfortunately passes away 2 years after the story aired. He's back with Jamie, and obviously the dynamic between him and Jamie was amazing. So it was nice to see that element back here. So obviously, the second Doctor is sent on a mission by the Time Lords, which obviously ties into the season 6B theory, that the two was working both for the Time Lords before his exile. And I really enjoyed the scenes when he was turned into an androgon and spends the time eating with Shokai, and I must admit it was quite funny, and how the two pretty much just rocked up to Oscar's restaurant and ate a lot, racking up a very expensive bill. And they had good scenes, and him, Charlton, and the person that played Shockeye had very good scenes, and I love how Charlton never actually missed a step. Now, those two didn't start Jamie quite a fair bit by calling him a mongrel by the way he was talking and calling him a hairy-legged Highlander, which was quite funny as well. Nicola Bryant was great here as well, and Perry does do a hefty amount, especially in part two when the TARDIS lands in Spain, and she pretty much decides to use herself as a cover by exploring what the hacienda looked like, whilst the sick doctor and Jamie were trying to enter the hacienda through a secret entrance. And I did like how she used her status as a student here because it was never really mentioned on during her time in the TARDIS. And of course, she is seen by Shockeye, and that's how part two cliffhanger ensues because she pretty much gets chased by Shockeye, and then she trips, and then Shockeye just leers over her, trying to "You're mine now," and pretty much implies that he obviously wants to kill her. And the scene was quite strange, but I'll get more into that later. And Perry and Jamie do work well here, and there was a scene when Jamie actually kisses her hand upon their farewells, and I think that definitely catches her surprise. And I don't think that was actually put in the script, so I think that was quite funny as well. And I think there was a scene that I found funny when the sick doctor was berating Perry, and then Perry like visibly mouths asshole, and then whilst he was feeding the TARDIS consoles, and that was also a very funny scene. How that pretty much slipped our minds is a mystery. And this is in part two, by the way. Actually, yeah, part one and part two. And Fraser Hines, is great to see him again as Jamie, and it seems that he's been given to the second Doctor to aid him in his travels. His fellow companion, Victoria, was actually mentioned as well, implying that the Time Lord allowed her to stay with the Doctor as well. But she was away studying graphology, and so that was a nice little other reference as well. So Jamie was also able to escape from the Centauran attack and hid under the space station where he was found by Six and Perry, and where he told them that the Doctor had been killed, and then the two were able to rescue his Doctor, and they were able to stop Cassini. And then Hines worked well with Baker and Bryant, and it was great, and that was great to see. And then as I said before, they all had very good chemistry together. Even though we didn't really see that many scenes with the second Doctor and Perry, but I did like the scene when he was actually trying to free her from when Cassini had actually tied them up. So now on to the enemies. First off, we have the Centaurans. There were two main ones in the story, and they were Naval and Stike. They were working with the Stars so they can use the Katsurama module to help them with the war against the Rutans, which is still ongoing. Now, I do have a problem with the way they were written because they're basically lackeys for Cassini and the Star, but the two realize this and they want to try and they attempt to try and betray them, but then that pretty much backfires when the sick doctor and Jamie encounter them, and Jamie stabs one of them in the leg, and the other Centauran is blown up, and one Centauran actually does end up getting killed later on. And I think the one that got stabbed in the leg got killed later on. And they were very iffy here. I mean, obviously mainly due to the fact that they were just literally just put on the back burner so that Cassini can pretty much dominate the story. So even though they were on the front cover of the DVD, but I think that was probably like the unique selling point of the story, other than the second Doctor returning. But yeah, that this pretty much does continue the fact that the Centaurans haven't really been well written since their debut story that was all the way back in season 11. So our next villain is Shockeye of the Quantum Craig. He was an androgon cook working at the space station, and he was very obsessed with food more, and was very obsessed with human flesh and wanted to eat it. And there are some scenes where he actually does actively pursue Perry and Jamie at different occasions so he can kill them, prep them, and eat them. And he does like his meat to have some flesh. It's pretty obvious, and he pretty much he was literally trying to tenderize Jamie at one point. And Shockeye was basically Cassini's henchman, and Shockeye actually hence resented Cassini for abandoning her androgon roots, so to speak. He's controversially killed by the sick doctor when he actually uses some cyanide to kill Shockeye, which was another memorable scene. But Shockeye deserved it because he was a very nasty villain. And lastly, we have Chicini of the Franzine Quig. She was an ordinary androgon, but then the story experimented on her, which allowed her to become an androgon TA, and she looked more human compared to Shokai. She was the one that was basically calling the shots and ordering the story around, even though the story had a hand in making her clever. She had the ability to read the minds of both the living and the dead, so she made the plan to get a time machine to experiment on the Time Lords, she wanted to, which is why the Time Lords wanted the Doctor to investigate what was going on, and if she wanted the Doctor's symbiotic nuclei so she can properly operate the time machine, and the Doctor was obviously not going to give them that piece of information willingly, so she had the second Doctor, turn into an androgon, although temporarily, so she can actually get information out of the Doctor. So all was going on until she realized that the Sixth Doctor was around. So then she was slowly reverting to androgon herself when she saw the Sixth Doctor's blood on the floor and started licking it, which was another strange scene. I thought she was a great villain and probably one of the best villains in season 22. And she's played by a famed actress, Jacqueline Pierce, and I loved how she was able to convey how cold and calculating Chicini was. So on to the fault of the story. I think the main issue, I think the story was a bit too gratuitous with the violence and how it was shown. Though personally, I don't mind the Sixth Doctor killing Shokai because Shokai is just a nasty piece of work, but I do think there were some scenes that were quite unneeded. Like how the Centaurans died, even though they weren't really needed in this story, but at the same time, their violent deaths weren't really that needed as well. Though it was nice to see them back, but it was just the way it was handled. They were handled. It was just not my cup of tea, so to speak. And also, I think this is another bad example of the Perry effect, and with the part 2 cliffhanger when she was literally being chased by the Androgon, and when then Shokai actually ends up capturing her at the start of part 3, and was pretty much wants to eat her, but then he's pretty much called away by Chicini. But then she's later than Perry, but fortunately, this is how she was able to get rescued. So it was an odd moment, but it was a very scary cliffhanger, especially for me as a kid. So this is going to be a very divisive opinion. So I do think The Two Doctors is a very misunderstood story, and to me, it's perfect in a sense. Even though I see it, the way I see it is a very dark comedic story. Even though there were some issues here and there, but I would say it's one of those stories where it's so good it's bad. You just have to see the train wreck for yourself. Even though I really loved it as a kid, and I think that's also another reason as well why I like it. But yeah, I think it definitely handles the fun element a lot better than other fun stories like The Mark of the Rani did. Even though Mark of the Rani was more theatrical, but it was quite boring. But for The Two Doctors, I think with the Robert Holmes magic, you can tell that there's a lot of fun in that story, and it could pretty much pass off as an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but set 20 years before they actually aired. So yeah, I'm just gonna give it a perfect 10. So my next review will be Time Lash, a story that is very well. If you want to find out my views on Time Lash, look out for that review. So thanks for watching this review. Please let me know your thoughts of The Two Doctors and this review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and like this video as well. Share it amongst your friends, family, and other Whovians out there. Until then, I'll see you later.